So I have the book Blackbird Singing in the Dead of Night by Dr. Greg Hunt, who is actually a seminary professor at Central. And he wrote this book in a time when he had lost his way. And he was just in a time of his life when he was unsure of his vocation and unable to hear God's word of clarity. I chose this book because I am also in that season of my life. And he was unsure of how to approach his issue, so he devoted journaling time once every single day in the mornings to studying the book of Matthew, and he journaled about it. And so he took that collection of journal notes and expounded upon it and made it actually this book. I came to this book looking for a step-by-step process for how to find God's voice, but actually I got a very eloquent and vulnerable account of his journey. I'm very appreciative of his transparency and reflection, and I'm encouraged to do the same. So there are three major things that he talks about. He talked about vocation, what it is. He talked about fear. He talked about his fears and his doubts. And then he talked about what God's response was to his vocation and to his response. So in vocation, he clarified it, and you think of it as being a calling, and you think it's like a grand view of what your life is supposed to be at the very end. But he says that it is several things. Number one, it's in responsive relationship with God, and I think responsive is a very important word there. It's also in loving relationship with your neighbor, whoever that is. And this thing really, really hit home for me, this next point. It is an evolutionary process that is continual over time. I think right now, because I'm a teacher, I'm always going to remain a teacher. Even though I'm not happy with my calling right now as a teacher, for 10 years from now, I know that in the future, it could change and I could take those things that I've learned as a teacher and make it something different and something better. Through faith, we live obediently and trusting God to create something meaningful and beautiful. That comes right out of the book. He says that we don't always get to see the big picture. We don't ever get to see the big picture, but instead we live daily in the small moments that God gives us. And he calls it a purpose-driven life. Now, he also gives warning to that, saying a purpose-driven life, because if we are constantly seeking out a purpose and that big picture and that end goal, then we miss out on the small, beautiful moments God has placed before us. He also says, use your influence as a voice for Christ. And at the very end of his book, he says when he was 16 years old, he heard God say, Greg, go be a preacher. And he thought that's what he was always supposed to be. So when his vocation began to shift into a nonprofit owner and manager, he thought that he was wrong. And at the end of the very end of the book, he says, use your influence as a voice for Christ. And I'm going to take that with me and know that no matter what I do, if I live in loving relationship with God and my neighbor, and I'm always constantly changing and striving to be better, and I'm always using my influence as a voice for Christ, that is my vocation. So he also talks about fear. This book is called Blackbird Singing in the Dead of Night, which is a Beatles song that I love so much. And he talks about how it is in moments when we can't hear God. And there's fear that comes into our minds because we feel like we can't hear or see what God is doing. And Dr. Hunt's ultimate fear was losing God in the process. He needed an inward resolution of his uncertainty. Gosh, that's me too. I always need an inward resolution of my uncertainty. I can't say how much I love that. Another fear that he had was losing control of his life. Knowing that God is in control, and even though we oftentimes feel like we have control, that's not always the case. And then in those moments of uncertainty, we lose our doubt, and then we question. And there's a little part in here that talks about faith and doubt, and how he thinks that he's always thought that they were on opposite ends of the spectrum, when it actually, through doubting, we have faith. And doubting is good. Doubting is how we grow and learn. Towards the end, and all throughout this book, he talks about God's responses to his daily journalings of Matthew. And he comes down, and I've summed these up into several points. God's response is that God is always with us, even when we don't hear or see him. Sometimes it's that still small voice in the back of our minds. He's there. He's there for us, even when we can't see or feel him. And then we need to release ourselves from the needless struggle to have and to hold on to what is already ours. I'm going to read a little excerpt. It says, release yourself from the needless struggle to have and to hold on to what is already yours. Why grasp at the wind when you are already in my grasp? Why continue to struggle after the life that is already yours, my gift to you, in me for all time? Simply be restful and responsive. The growing and going will flow naturally as you do. Taste and see. Enter into the feast of heaven. And keep singing, y'all come. Life is good. I think that in this book, clarity comes with time. I don't know what I'm supposed to do right at this moment. And I'm okay with being a teacher, and I'm okay with that vocation right now. But I know that as time goes on, clarity will happen, and in God's time, not in my time, but in God's time. And I have to learn to be okay with letting go of control, and being okay with the certain uncertainties that I face, and not worrying, but knowing that I'm in God's grasp at all times. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you have a wonderful class.